What kind of woman just smiles while her husband announces a divorce on stage? He thought he would break her. He thought she'd cry, scream, maybe beg him to stay. But as the cameras rolled and the crowd gasped, she reached calmly into her purse and handed him the divorce papers. Already signed. What happened next? It left everyone in that hall breathless. Before we continue, make sure to like, share, and follow for more powerful stories that flip the script on betrayal. Now, let's dive into the announcement he regretted. You'll need a dress, he said flatly, not even looking up from his phone. Amanda turned from the kitchen counter, wiping her hands on a towel. For what? Julian finally looked at her, tapping his watch as if time owed him something. There's an exclusive gala next Saturday. I'm speaking. I need you to look presentable. Presentable. She nodded slowly, but in her eyes, something flickered. This wasn't new. The sudden commands, the cold tone, the way her name had become less a word and more a duty. Julian had always liked the spotlight. Polished, charming, powerful. The perfect gentleman to the world, and slowly, a stranger at home. Amanda didn't argue. She hadn't argued in months. As he walked away to take a call, she stared at the back of his suit, the one she picked out 2 birthdays ago. A deep navy tailored to make him look invincible. But even the finest thread couldn't hide what was unraveling underneath. She picked up the invitation card he dropped on the table, embossed in gold. The annual Empire Circle Gala. She smiled faintly. If only he knew. This time she'd be ready. Because when a man drags a woman into the spotlight just to humiliate her, he should pray she's still the same woman he once knew. Amanda stood in front of the mirror, curling her hair in slow, precise movements. The heat from the iron barely matched the fire rising beneath her skin. She had known for weeks. The late-night texts, the cold kisses, the way Julian had started speaking to her like a business associate. He thought she was blind, or too soft to notice. But Amanda had seen everything. And worse, she had felt it. The distance, the plotting, the smug rehearsals he did in the study when he thought she was asleep. He was planning something. And now, this gala. A perfect public arena. The stage where he could tear her down and walk away looking noble. Humble. A man who tried, but couldn't continue the marriage. Amanda smiled. But it wasn't the same smile Julian had grown used to. This one had edges. It didn't bloom, it cut. She had already spoken with her lawyer. Quietly, carefully. All assets traced, copies of shared accounts made. Divorce papers printed, reviewed, signed. She carried them now in her handbag, tucked between lip gloss and silence. She had cried already, 2 months ago, on the bathroom floor, in the dark. But that woman was gone now. Tonight, she would wear her best dress. Tonight, she would stand beside him as he made his move. And tonight, she would let him feel, for the first time, what it meant to be outplayed. She picked up her perfume and dabbed it gently behind her ears. The scent of wild iris and quiet rage. Julian stepped into the doorway behind her. Ready? She turned, all grace and poise. Of course, she said with that same perfect smile. Let's give them something to talk about. The cameras flashed like lightning, and the red carpet stretched before them like a runway built for gods. Julian stepped out first, all polished arrogance in a tuxedo that shimmered under the lights. He turned and extended a hand to Amanda, a perfect performance for the watching world. She took it with calm grace. The crowd of photographers surged the moment they saw her. Amanda, always radiant, was a vision tonight, but not in the way they remembered. Something about her had changed. There was poise in her posture, steel in her silence. And behind her smile, a mystery. They walked side by side, waving, pausing for photos. The press shouted questions. Mr. and Mrs. Telford, how's the marriage holding up? Is it true there's trouble in paradise? Mrs. Telford, what's next for you? Amanda's smile never wavered. She looked straight ahead, a portrait of elegance. But inside, her pulse beat steady, not with fear, but with power. Julian gave rehearsed chuckles, shaking hands with socialites and board members. He was still basking in the illusion that he was in control. But Amanda knew. Every step she took on that carpet was a countdown. They reached the marble steps of the gala venue, where a golden arch read, "A night of legacy." Julian leaned in and whispered, "Smile wider. You're about to be famous." Amanda's eyes flicked toward him. "Oh, I'm counting on it." She turned to wave at the cameras one last time before walking into the hall. And as the lights above glistened and champagne glasses clinked in the distance, Amanda walked forward, not like a woman about to be humiliated, but like a queen about to claim her stage. The ballroom was bathed in gold light, every crystal on the chandelier catching the gleam of wealth and status. Laughter echoed through the room, soft jazz hummed in the background, and servers glided between guests like shadows with silver trays. Amanda sat at the center table beside Julian, her face calm, her back straight, her clutch resting softly on her lap, the one that carried more than just lipstick tonight. Julian tapped his glass with a spoon, rising slowly. The room gradually fell into silence. All eyes turned to him, the adored CEO, the charming empire builder, the man everyone wanted to be or be near. He adjusted his bow tie, then offered a tight smile. "Good evening, everyone." Polite applause followed. He glanced down at Amanda briefly, her face unreadable. "I want to thank each of you for being part of our journey. Tonight isn't just another gala. It's a celebration of legacy, of growth, and of hard choices." Amanda didn't blink. Julian continued. "And speaking of hard choices, there's something I've decided to share tonight. Something personal." Now the room leaned in. Amanda's hand subtly gripped the edge of her chair, not out of panic, but readiness. Julian took a breath. "Many of you have known Amanda and I as a couple. And yes, we've had years together. But not all partnerships are meant to last forever." Gasps. Murmurs. Amanda stayed still. "I've decided," Julian said, looking not at her but at the crowd, "that we will be parting ways. Amanda and I are officially getting a divorce." The room fell into a stunned silence. All eyes shifted to Amanda. Surely now she would cry, scream, walk out, create a scene. But instead, Amanda reached slowly into her clutch and pulled out a thin cream folder. She stood, quietly. She turned to Julian, and for the first time that night, looked him directly in the eye. "Then go ahead and sign this," she said, offering the folder to him. "It's already dated." Julian froze, lips parted. The crowd's silence was deafening. Amanda smiled, not cruelly, but with something far more dangerous. "Peace." Julian's hand trembled slightly as he accepted the cream folder. The embossed logo of a top-tier law firm stared back at him like a mirror. His throat dried. His lips twitched, but no words came. The crowd watched, breathless. Amanda stepped away from him, heels clicking softly on the marble floor, and walked toward the stage. A quiet murmur rose, uncertain. What was she doing? Then she took the mic. She didn't look at her husband. She didn't even glance at the guests. Her eyes were somewhere higher, calm, clear, resolved. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight," she began, voice steady, soft, but piercing. "But since the subject has been opened, allow me to speak." Now the ballroom was truly silent. "I want to thank Julian," she said, her eyes finally meeting his. "Not for the years we shared, but for the clarity he gave me when he showed me who he really was." A few gasps. A few curious glances exchanged. "What he didn't know," Amanda continued, "is that while he was plotting a public embarrassment, I was finalizing some paperwork of my own." She reached into her clutch once more and pulled out a sleek black envelope. "I lost my father 6 months ago," she said quietly, "and the legal formalities just cleared." Her voice didn't waver. "My father left me everything. His global estate, assets, holdings. In total, over $2 billion. A collective inhale swept the room. Julian looked like someone had punched the air out of him. Amanda's voice turned sharp but elegant. "I didn't say anything before because I never needed to. I wasn't here to prove anything. I was just someone's wife. But now, I stand here, not as Julian's ex-wife." She paused, then smiled. "But as Amanda Carter, CEO of the Carter Foundation, and sole heir to a legacy your eyes were too shallow to see." The crowd erupted in hushed murmurs, gasps, and disbelief. Security, her security, appeared from the edges of the ballroom. They moved with silent coordination, forming around her like a royal escort. Amanda turned to Julian one last time. "You thought this was your stage," she said softly, "but it was mine all along." Then, without another word, she handed the mic to the host, turned gracefully, and walked out, her guards flanking her on both sides. Julian stood frozen in place, ink barely drying on the divorce papers. Everyone knew exactly who the real star of the night had been. Julian just stood there, hands frozen, lips slightly apart, the divorce papers still in his grip. He had expected tears. He had expected a scene. But instead, Amanda had stood tall, spoken clearly, and walked off like she had rehearsed the entire moment. And maybe she had. Around him, the room buzzed. Guests whispered behind hands. Phones were out, discreetly capturing what was quickly becoming the most talked about scandal in high society. Julian's heart thudded in his chest. Sweat gathered beneath his collar despite the ballroom's cool air. A server passed by, and for a second, even he gave Julian a look. Not pity, not confusion, disdain. He stepped down from the stage, searching the crowd, but Amanda was gone. Security. Her security. When had she arranged that? How had she known? His eyes darted around, suddenly aware of how alone he was in a room full of people. The laughter, the charm, the Julian's such a king, energy, all of it had evaporated. What remained was a man stripped of his mask and power. He moved back to their table, sat slowly, and reached for his glass of champagne. His fingers shook. His reflection in the glass, pale, lips tight, eyes wide, didn't look like a victor. It looked like someone who had just been dethroned. All those months planning this night, choosing the perfect moment, the perfect setting, the public stage where he would drop the bomb and walk away looking powerful, desirable, free. And Amanda had flipped it without even raising her voice. He thought she was soft. He thought her silence meant surrender. He thought he was 10 steps ahead. But now, he was the one scrambling to make sense of what just happened. He looked down at the divorce documents again, her signature already there. Neat. Decisive. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't begged. She had been ready for this moment before he even opened his mouth. A chair beside him creaked as someone leaned in. A former colleague, maybe a client. Rough night, Julian. The man whispered, not with empathy, but with a smirk. Didn't know Amanda had that in her. Julian didn't respond. His eyes remained on the stage she had once stood on, now empty, but echoing with the applause that had followed her exit. He suddenly realized the mic drop wasn't his. It never was. Amanda had just stepped off the stage, but the impact still echoed in every corner of the hall. Julian sat frozen. Not only had she walked away from the public divorce with dignity, she had shattered every assumption about who she was. A woman who once folded his shirts was now a billionaire heiress. As Amanda approached her table, a well-known journalist intercepted her, microphone already raised. Mrs. Carter, or should I say, CEO Carter, may we ask what your next steps are? Amanda turned slightly, offering a graceful smile. Tonight isn't about next steps. Tonight is about standing tall in your own truth. The journalist blinked, clearly not expecting such poise. But Amanda was far from done. She turned, lifting her chin, and signaled her assistant, a woman in a smart navy suit who immediately handed Amanda a sleek leather folder. Amanda turned back to the crowd and raised her voice slightly, not with arrogance, but with clarity. I'd like to make one final announcement, she said. For those who knew my father, you'd remember he believed wealth without purpose was just noise. That's why I've decided to pledge 1/3 of my inheritance to launching the Carter Initiative, a global platform dedicated to educating and empowering women left behind by systems, partners, and circumstances. There was a beat of silence, then thunderous applause. The very people who once saw her as just Julian's wife now stood clapping. Influencers, CEOs, ambassadors, all on their feet. Amanda nodded in appreciation, but remained grounded. You don't have to have $1 billion to start over, she added. You just need your name and the courage to walk away. Julian was still in his seat, the folder of signed divorce papers now closed and useless before him. His mouth hung open slightly, but no words came. How? When? Why hadn't he known? Because he never looked. That was the answer. Amanda had been blooming in silence, and he never thought to water the roots. Near the back of the room, one of his former business partners leaned over to whisper to another. I always thought Julian was the catch. Turns out, she was the gold. And Julian heard it. Every syllable. Amanda turned one last time to the crowd, giving a light nod to the MC, who now looked like he was standing in the presence of royalty. Thank you, she said softly, and then, without waiting for fanfare or interviews, she made her way toward the exit. Whispers filled the air again. Did you hear what she inherited? They say it's over $2 billion. She's more powerful than half the room. And she hadn't bragged. Not once. She had simply stated facts. That was the kind of power people remembered. Amanda's legacy hadn't begun on that stage. But that night, In that room, everyone finally saw what had always been quietly rising. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom slowly opened. Outside, the deep hum of a waiting luxury car filled the air. A sleek black Rolls-Royce, engine running, headlights low, and doors open, gleamed under the venue lights. Amanda didn't rush. She walked through the sea of whispers and stares like a queen gliding through her court. Her head held high, her expression calm. Not triumphant, not smug, just resolute. Two sharply dressed security guards flanked her, parting the crowd like waves before royalty. Julian stood up instinctively, as if trying to reclaim control, as if he could stop her with a word. "Amanda," he called, his voice cracking through the hum. She turned slightly. Their eyes locked, but she didn't stop walking. That single glance held every answer he'd been searching for. It said, "You don't get to speak now. You had your turn, and you wasted it." The crowd silently watched as Amanda reached the rolls. Her driver, a middle-aged woman in tailored uniform, opened the door for her with a respectful nod. Amanda paused at the door, then looked back at the building behind her. The venue where she'd once stood quietly beside her husband, and now walked away from him entirely. Photographers scrambled to capture the moment, lenses clicking in rhythm. Julian pushed through a small group, trying to follow her outside. But one of the security guards stepped directly into his path. No aggression, no words, just an immovable wall in a tailored suit. "She won't speak to you," the guard said plainly. Julian stared at him, then past him, toward the woman sliding gracefully into the back seat of her car. The woman who used to wait for him to come home, cook his meals, iron his shirts. Now, she had a chauffeur, a team, a legacy. The rolls pulled off with quiet power, the low hum of the engine sounding like a final, whispered goodbye. Inside the ballroom, the host tried to resume the event, but the atmosphere had completely shifted. Conversations buzzed, phones lit up with breaking headlines. Wife stuns guests at divorce event, leaves and rolls after revealing billionaire inheritance. Amanda leaned back into the leather seat, silence settling like silk around her. The city lights flickered past the window, but her eyes weren't on them. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She wasn't thinking about Julian. She was thinking of what came next. The future was no longer something she feared. It was hers, earned, claimed, and fully in motion. Back inside the venue, Julian stood alone at the open door, guests now avoiding his gaze. Some whispered, some scoffed, others just pitted him. He didn't even notice. Because for the first time in his life, under the noise, under the suit, under the stage lights, he felt what it was like to be small. And as Amanda's taillights disappeared into the distance, so did the last ounce of control he thought he had over her life. She hadn't just exited. She had risen. The music played on, but no one was dancing. Julian stood at the edge of the ballroom, still in the same spot where Amanda had last looked him in the eye. His drink sat untouched in his hand, the ice melting slowly, just like the pride he once wore like armor. He blinked, trying to bring himself back into the room, back to the event he had so meticulously planned, thinking he would steal the spotlight. Now the spotlight had burned him. All around him, the guests continued to chatter, but not to him. They huddled in groups, murmuring and gesturing toward the door she had disappeared through. A few threw curious glances in his direction, but most avoided meeting his gaze. No one wanted to be too close to a man who had just been publicly outclassed by the very woman he tried to humiliate. The MC tried to move the event along. Awards were announced, champagne flowed, the band played their soft jazz set. But something had shifted. The room felt colder, tighter, like everyone was still catching their breath from the spectacle they'd just witnessed. Julian tried to join a conversation near the bar, two tech executives he once laughed with. But they smiled awkwardly, offered brief nods, and turned back to each other. He was invisible, not because he had lost money, but because he had lost face. "Man, that was brutal," someone whispered behind him. Julian turned, but the speaker was already walking away. A flashbulb popped near the corner of the room, some influencer snapping shots with Amanda's name in the caption. Her story had already gone viral. Billionaire heiress hands husband divorce papers, exits event in power move. Julian's hands clenched slightly. He looked down at his tuxedo, the same one Amanda had picked out for him last year, before everything changed. She always had an eye for elegance. She also had an eye for storms, and apparently, how to survive them. He moved toward a side hallway to breathe, but even there, two event organizers stood whispering. She never raised her voice once, one said. She didn't have to, the other replied. Julian couldn't escape the echo. His phone vibrated. A text from an investor. Let's hold off our meeting this week. We'll reschedule later. He didn't need a translator to know what that meant. He stood against the wall, guests swirling past him like he wasn't even there. He looked around for a familiar face, anyone to anchor him. But all the anchors had long sailed after the ship that Amanda now captained. For the first time in his life, Julian wasn't admired, or envied, or respected. He was simply alone. Alone in a room full of people who once clung to his name. Now, they were already learning to pronounce hers. Julian sat alone in his car, parked just outside the venue, engine off, silence thick. The glitz of the night clung to his tuxedo, but the weight on his chest made it hard to breathe. He loosened his tie and leaned back in his seat, eyes closed. But the silence didn't bring peace. It brought memories. He remembered their first apartment, small, noisy, and warm. Amanda had painted the chipped kitchen cabinets herself, humming as she worked. He used to tease her for her optimism, how she always believed they were just one lucky break away from something better. And maybe they were, because the business took off. The money came, and slowly, she faded into the background of his new world. He remembered her voice on the phone while he traveled, always asking if he'd eaten, if he'd slept. Even when he forgot her birthday, she didn't raise her voice. She just said, maybe next year. He thought she was weak. Now he saw the truth. Every time she held back, every time she stayed silent, she wasn't giving in. She was collecting herself. And he was squandering what could never be bought again. Julian leaned forward and rested his forehead against the steering wheel. A wave of shame hit him like a tide. He remembered the day he told her they needed a break. She'd stood at the edge of the living room, holding a photo of them from their first year of marriage. She didn't cry. She just nodded. Okay, she'd said softly. If that's what you need. He thought she'd wait for him. But tonight proved she never planned to. He remembered the moment she handed him the papers, calm, poised, already knowing what came next. She hadn't just prepared for the announcement. She had prepared to leave him behind. He had walked away thinking she'd fall apart. But she had risen in his absence. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through old photos. The two of them smiling at dinner parties, in hotel rooms, in front of Christmas trees. But the woman in those photos looked different now. Not just older, stronger, brighter. Amanda had become a woman he didn't recognize. Not because she changed, but because he never truly saw her before. A new message blinked on his screen. We'll be pausing all collaborations for now. Best of luck moving forward. It was from one of his biggest brand partners. Julian locked the phone and sat in silence again. He had everything. Until the night he treated his wife like a prop in his ego's show. And now? He had tuxedo buttons that felt too tight, a phone full of silence, and the echo of a woman's quiet triumph ringing in his head. He remembered Amanda once saying, sometimes strength is quiet. You just never noticed it. He noticed now. Too late. Julian didn't sleep that night. He stared at his phone long after midnight, reading through old chats with Amanda, texts about dinner plans, birthday wishes, her asking about his health during a flu he'd once brushed off. Messages he'd left unread at the time, too busy, too distracted, too full of himself. Now, they read like love letters from a life he had taken for granted. At 2:43 a.m., he opened a new message. Julian, Amanda, can we talk? He stared at the screen, thumb hovering, then hit send. No response. At 2:51, he tried again. Julian, I wasn't expecting what you did tonight. But I respect it. I just want to talk. Please. Still nothing. He switched apps. Searched her number. Tried calling. This number is no longer in service. He sat up straight. That was new. He called again. Same message. She'd changed her number. Desperate, he searched online. Surely, someone in the press or a blog must have shared something after tonight's spectacle. He found dozens of articles, all about her. Not a single one mentioned his name. Amanda Cale shocks high society with billion-dollar inheritance reveal. From wife to wonder, Amanda's graceful exit leaves room speechless. Security escorts the star of the night, a quiet power move. Julian dropped the phone and leaned back on the couch, his heart pounding. She hadn't just moved on, she had cut all ties. There were no breadcrumbs to follow, no weak links to exploit. The woman he once thought he could manipulate with charm or apologies was gone. He grabbed his laptop, opened his email, typed out a message to her old address. Subject, I'm sorry. Amanda, I don't know where to start. Maybe I don't deserve to. I was wrong. Completely. What I did to you, the way I tried to control the narrative, was cruel and selfish. You didn't deserve that. You never did. I see you now, and I know I've lost the best thing that ever happened to me. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Julian. He read it 3 times. Then hit send. The inbox didn't confirm if it went through. No bounce. No reply. Just silence. By morning, Julian was still at the window of his penthouse, the same penthouse Amanda had helped furnish. He watched the sunrise alone, still wearing his tuxedo shirt. A knock came at the door. His assistant peeked in, hesitant. The sponsors from last quarter just called. They're pulling out. Julian barely nodded. Okay. And Amanda, she's trending. Again. He closed his eyes. He had taken her to an event to embarrass her. She had used it to rewrite her story. And now, he couldn't reach her. Not by phone. Not by email. Not even in memory, because the Amanda he once knew no longer existed. She had evolved into something untouchable. And he had never felt smaller. At every newsstand, she was there. Not in the background, not in a corner. Centerfold. Powerful. Effortless. Amanda Kale. Glossy covers bore her name in bold fonts. The billionaire beauty who shattered expectations. The woman who walked away with grace. How one quiet wife became the face of power. She hadn't granted any interviews yet, but she didn't have to. Her silence was selling more copies than words ever could. Fashion magazines celebrated her poise. Business journals broke down the staggering inheritance she'd received, traced to an uncle in Europe who had passed recently, leaving Amanda sole heir to a legacy of oil wealth and private equity. But it wasn't just the money. It was how she handled it. There were no angry rants. No scandalous tweets. No exposés. Just that one moment. Her calm announcement, the signed papers, the short speech, and the graceful exit. Her social media pages, once quiet, were now followed by millions. Every photo sparked admiration. Every comment glowed with support. That's how you reclaim your narrative. She's what elegance looks like under pressure. From tears to triumph. She's our queen. She hadn't posted since that night. Her last image was a quiet one. A city skyline through tinted glass. No caption. And yet, it broke the internet. Julian saw it all. He walked past a shop window, saw her cover on Forbes Women. He reached for the copy, then stopped, realizing the clerk was watching him. He pretended to adjust his cuff instead and walked out, jaw tight. At the office, whispers followed him. Former associates avoided eye contact. His name had started fading from the lips of clients and media alike. Every boardroom he entered now felt colder. Every meeting shorter. He sat at his desk, opening his laptop, and there she was again, featured in a write-up titled Amanda Kale, Reinvention Done Right. The first line pierced. Once known only as the quiet wife of Julian Trent, Amanda Kale now stands on her own, and above. He slammed the laptop shut. He couldn't compete. Not with her class. Not with her calm. She hadn't attacked him publicly. She hadn't said a word against him. That's what made it worse. The world respected her, because she didn't stoop. Amanda had become more than a woman scorned. She was now a symbol. Of strength. Of surprise. Of elegance that doesn't shout. It simply rises. Julian picked up a copy of Elle Business later that day, when no one was watching. He stared at her photo. Black silk dress. Minimal makeup. That steady gaze. She didn't just look rich. She looked untouchable. He wondered if she ever thought about him now. But he already knew the answer. She didn't have to look back. She was the cover now. And he wasn't even a footnote. Julian stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen, the silence in his office heavier than usual. The room used to buzz with calls, calendar alerts, and assistants hurrying in and out with folders full of numbers and handshakes. But now the air sat still. And cold. He was behind on 3 deadlines. A major client had quietly pulled out last week, citing a shift in brand alignment. Another didn't return his calls. And the third? They went with Amanda's foundation instead, publicly praising her vision and values. His name had become inconvenient. His inbox told the story. Emails from investors reassessing involvement. Polite rejections from future deals, and a message from the board requesting a performance review. He, Julian Trent, once the man who walked with swagger through every corporate corridor, was now walking on a tightrope. The gossip hadn't helped either. People whispered he planned the divorce to embarrass her, and failed. Others said he only married her for her calm, and now missed it more than he'd admit. But the worst? The murmurs that Amanda had always been the real gem, and he, the fool who tossed her away before she shined. His office, once a hub of power, now felt like a prison of regrets. He looked out the window, down at the city that once bowed to his whims. Now, it didn't look back. His new assistant knocked gently, eyes darting nervously. "Sir, the board rescheduled your review. Tomorrow morning." He nodded without looking. "Thanks." Closed the door. Once alone again, he stood up, moved to the mirror behind his desk. The man staring back looked tired. When did the light behind his eyes dim? He thought about Amanda, not the version on magazines or in front of cheering crowds, but the one who used to make tea late at night, who stayed up helping him rehearse pitch decks, who gave up job interviews so he wouldn't feel insecure about being the only breadwinner. And now? Now she was the one hiring. He walked to the bar in the corner, poured himself a drink, something he had been doing more often lately. One sip, and the bitter truth landed harder than the whiskey. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost his anchor. And his empire, without her calm presence, without her quiet corrections and insights, had begun to sink. Slowly, publicly, he turned on the TV for noise, flipping through channels, until he landed on one where Amanda was giving a donation at a women's leadership summit. Applause filled the room. She looked radiant. He turned the volume down, not off. And for a while, he just listened. He remembered when she used to clap for him like that. And now, the world clapped for her. The ballroom was familiar. Same golden chandeliers, same velvet-draped tables, same orchestra playing in the background. But for Julian, it felt like walking into a memory that had soured. He sat alone at a corner table, tuxedo crisp but spirit crumpled. No one approached. Not the old friends. Not the business partners. Not even the women who used to hover near his spotlight. They all glanced, whispered, and moved on. The gala was the same annual event. The same one where, exactly a year ago, he had tried to make a show of power by announcing his divorce. He had expected that night to be the beginning of his freedom. It had turned out to be the beginning of his fall. Tonight, he watched another man stand on the stage. Younger, hungrier, someone now labeled the new face of innovation. And seated beside that man, clapping and smiling with unmistakable grace, was Amanda. Not just present, honored. She wore a deep emerald gown, elegant and composed. Cameras clicked. Applause echoed. She didn't look his way once. Julian sipped his drink slowly. No security team would escort him anywhere tonight. No inheritance announcement. No thunderous applause. Just silence. Just the echo of everything he used to be. He leaned back in his chair and looked up at the chandelier above. The same light that once made him feel untouchable. Now it just reminded him how far he had fallen. And how bright she had become. Amanda's name no longer echoed in just boardrooms. It rang through classrooms, shelters, and global summits. What started as a personal storm had become a public revolution. She founded the Phoenix Foundation, an organization committed to empowering women abandoned, overlooked, and underestimated. Single mothers, divorced women, abused wives. They came to her door broken and left believing again. She built safe homes in cities where women had nowhere to turn. She funded scholarships for girls told they weren't enough. She backed businesses others called too emotional or too risky. And each time one of those women succeeded, Amanda felt a piece of her old self being honored. 1 year after the night she stepped off that red carpet with her head high and her past behind her, Amanda stood on a global stage receiving the International Changemaker Award. As the audience rose in a standing ovation, Amanda looked out, not to bask in praise, but to remember. She saw the shadows of women who'd once sat in silence. She saw versions of herself. The girl who once stayed quiet through betrayal, who once doubted her worth, who once needed permission to rise. And now, she had given herself, and countless others, that permission. Her smile was soft but certain as she concluded her speech. You don't have to shout to be powerful. Some women lead not with noise, but with clarity and the courage to walk away. The room thundered with applause again. But Amanda? She simply bowed her head, stepped off the stage, and walked back into Purpose. Julian sat on the edge of his couch, remote in hand, eyes hollow. The room was dim, unkempt, filled with silence broken only by the soft hum of the television. Then he saw her. Amanda. She stood poised on a global stage, receiving yet another award, this time for her groundbreaking work in women's advocacy and economic transformation. Cameras flashed. The announcer's voice praised her as one of the most influential voices of this generation. Julian's fingers gripped the remote tighter. She hadn't aged a day, still radiant, still composed. Her smile wasn't the forced one he used to dismiss. It was full, powerful, and free. The host asked her one question. What would you say to women going through betrayal right now? Amanda paused, then said gently, don't waste energy proving your worth to those who threw you away. Heal, rise, and shine so bright they can only watch. Julian leaned back slowly. His throat tightened. He didn't reach for his phone. He already knew it wouldn't connect. As the screen faded to a commercial, he whispered, barely audible to even himself. That should have been us. But it wasn't, because he had made his choice. And now, she was the one the world listened to, while he was just another man watching her from the dark. Once, she stood beside a man who thought silence meant submission, who mistook grace for weakness. But the truth? Some women don't shout, they prepare. She didn't cry when he embarrassed her. She didn't beg when he left her. She waited, not for revenge, but for the right moment to rise. And when she did, she rose higher than he ever dreamed. Now, her footsteps echo in places his name no longer reaches. Her silence became a legacy. His pride became his shadow. So the next time you see a quiet woman smiling through betrayal, look again. She may not be broken. She may just be building. Moral of the story? Never mistake silence for weakness. Some women don't scream, they calculate. If this story moved you, like, share, and follow for more powerful folktales that speak truth to power.